Hey there, everyone. 下午好. Good afternoon. The China Environment Forum does an afternoon meeting. Almost never happens, and I see a lot of you. So I'm starting to discover that the China Environment Forum audiences like to sleep in. Or you're on the red line. Only the DC people will get that joke. We are on webcast, so be mindful of that. My name is Jennifer Turner. I direct the China Environment Forum. And I've been here for 19 years, so very soon I'll be here 20 years. And so just, you know, so we're almost done with our rebel stage, I'm afraid. But yeah, so for the 21 years that the project's existed, we've put on meetings, exchanges, created lots of publications and multimedia research looking at energy and environmental issues in China. Our big project for the last 8 years is called Choke Point China, looking at water energy confrontations. We've done a lot over the years working with Chinese civil society organizations. But one thread that is always kind of there is that we're really interested in governance, right? But you know, governance, you always think that's not a very sexy topic. But look, today a meeting on governance and the room is full. I have a topic for you people. Governance, it sells. So, yeah, but and just so since there are a few new faces, should let you know that the Woodrow Wilson Center, we were created in 1968 by Congress. So instead of building a statue for pigeons, they created a foreign policy research center that we have regional programs, we have specialty ones like China Environment Forum, we're special, we're a country and an issue, science, technology, and innovation. So if some of you who are new and are interested in those kind of topics, make sure you can sign up for those mailing lists. Well, and there's iced tea and brownies and lemonade and things to keep you awake. But I think you will be kept awake here today because we are having a meeting for the first time since 2007. I used the word dragon in my introduction, right? Today's meeting is called Beheading Dragons, Streamlining China's Environmental Governance. In case, because you people are all cool, and so you know that in March, the Chinese government instituted some big reforms because there's a war on pollution going on, and they needed to modernize their government sector. And so now the Ministry of Environmental Protection, MEP, has become the Ministry of Ecological Environment. We're going to hear about that. And so the Beheading Dragons is that, do you guys know the story about how water is managed in China? You know that there's the Zhou Long Zhi Shui. So the 9 dragons rule the water. So there's like these 9 bureaucracies in China that would kind of compete on managing the quality and quantity of water. Well, when bureaucracies compete, the environmental problems are not protected. So, but in general, there's also other kind of bureaucracies that have controlled other aspects of pollution control, natural resources, and so they're consolidating. So today, you guys, I'm so pleased. On a beautiful summer day, you all came here to spend it with us. So I'm so happy. And so we're going to start off. I've got 3 great speakers. We're going to start off with Liu Zhoushi, who's a staff attorney at the Environmental Law Institute. And it's going to be exciting. He's going to detail, though, how the regulatory authorities, what the shift is. So he's got the beginning pulse on what are these initial reforms and, you know, how we should be thinking about them. And he supposedly has some fun stories. You promise me. And then Hu Tao will kind of pick it up from there. Hu Tao directs the China program at WWF here in DC. He's a repeat offender here at the China Environment Forum, speaking quite a few times. He used to work in a think tank under the Ministry of Environmental Protection. He's an economist, but he tells good stories. He's a great guy. And so he's going to talk to us about focusing on a little more deeply into how climate change is going to figure into the new Ministry of Ecological Environment. And then to take it even into greater detail, because we don't want to just be broad trends, we have Liu Shuang, who's the director of Low Carbon Growth Program at the Energy Foundation in China. And she's going to be talking about the emission trading system, which is meant to address carbon emissions in China. And so talking about what the recent reforms are going to mean for that program. And just also, again, all my speakers, I always ask them, I say, tell us stories, right? We don't just need stats. And your job, ladies and gentlemen, besides drinking iced tea, lemonade, and eating cookies, is to think of challenging questions, because these are cutting-edge China governance and policy research, folks. And well, they're not just research, they do action. So we're going to start off with Zhoushi. And again, get ready your hard questions. And they've been instructed to tell us stories. There you go. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's really an honor to be here. So my name is Zhuoshi Liu, and I'm a staff attorney at the Environmental Law Institute, a think tank here started in 1969. And at ELI, some brief words about myself. I graduated from Tsinghua University and University of Texas School of Law in 2014 with JD. So I used to practice energy and corporate. And so at ELI, we are doing some interesting projects in China. We are building capacities of NGOs, prosecutors, and judges on environmental public interest litigation. We held 5 great workshops in Tianjin this year. We trained more than 260 participants. And we also built a dialogue mechanism between Chinese government, say the Ministry of Ecology and the Environment and multinational corporations to share best practices on enforcement and compliance. So our goal is to build a better rule of law in the field of environmental governance in China to make it the regulatory environment more predictable and more stable. And for that, we are happy to engage with all the sectors in this field. And coming back to our topic today, so I'd be more than happy to discuss with you the recent establishment of Ministry of Ecology and Environment and some other related recent developments. So as Jennifer mentioned, in Chinese mythology, dragons symbolize, the mythic creatures, controlling weather and climate. And when the dragons, compete for authority, to govern the waters, they sometimes ignore the important things, such as who are going to create the clouds, who are going to allocate the water. Eventually, all those dragons are competing each other, but leaving the real work undone. And so it's the same problem, or similar problem happening in China. So the environment, covers a lot of fields. So since its initiation in 1980s, SEPA, the predecessor of MEP and MEE, has been a really, really small entity. But until recently, it still had a very limited authority. It governs air quality, but only conventional pollutants. They include carbon monoxide, but not carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is connected to climate change, and it falls in jurisdiction of the almighty National Development and Reform Commission. And it's also, only regulates surface water quality. For the groundwater, it doesn't have the jurisdiction to do it. Who has it? The Ministry of Agriculture. And what about, some surface water, which is relocated in the areas under the control of the Office for the South to North Water Diversion Project? Well, MEP didn't, have the luck to do it. That means a lot of computation, coordination, and delaying in this regulation process. And that, really contradicts with the mandate of Chinese environment protection law, as well as the new concept of ecological civilization, mandated by the party leadership. So, 10 years after the establishment of Ministry of Environment Protection, this year, the MEP was upgraded to a new entity, which is called Ministry of Ecology and Environment. So the rationale for this change was to combine those authorities from the other dragons, not 9, but 6 this time. Supposedly, MEE will coordinate these powers and formulate more integrated policies and make the enforcement work even more predictable and to give public participation more opportunity. So here, for this slide, we can see the logo of the new Ministry of Ecology and the Environment. Not so much change from the MEP logo, but we can...
Oh, wait, you have to talk in the mic.
Change to MEE. And also on early April, the office building of the MEE was, formally changed with a new, nameplate. So where were the changes? Yeah. So back in March 17th, the State Council issued the institutional reform plan. So it says that we need to rename the MEP into MEE and integrate all those other functions. Also, another interesting development accompanying this was the plan on deepening the institutional reform of the party and state is issued on March the 21st, that's 4 days later. So in this policy document, it's issues the cousin policy, so under which it is the MEE is going to supervise an integrated environmental enforcement task team. So that means the environmental enforcement authority under the Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Water Resources will be combined into a new enforcement organization. So now, MEE seems to be having some realities in enforcing all this environmental laws and policy. Here we go. Here are where the authority, where the new functions come from. First of all, for the CO2, the National Development and Reform Commission, the National Economic Planning Authority, used to be in charge of climate change and the carbon emission reduction work. So this is the agency who used to be in charge of the carbon trading system, which was launched last December. And so the Department of Climate Change of NDRC, has been integrated into Ministry of Environment. Also, for the Ministry of Land Resources, which governs the public land and the most of the natural resources in China, it used to handle all those they work on preventing groundwater pollution. And now the Chinese government realized that the hydrologically surface water is not separable from groundwater, so it's better to have one authority to deal with it. As for the Ministry of Water Resource, that ministry used to be in charge of the watershed-wide environmental protection, and most important of all, it has an approval authority on where the discharge pipes are located. Surprisingly, MEPD didn't have the authority to control this. So, this authority has also been incorporated into Ministry of Environment. And as for soil pollution, although China's soil pollution prevention and control law, has been under the legislative process for 10 years, it's still not there. But this time, the regulatory agency, has been switched from agriculture to environment. Another interesting development is China's State Oceanic Administration regulated the ocean, environment protection about, both within China's, territorial seas and even with, for other, water, sea surfaces under Chinese control. This agency was abolished during this institutional reorganization. So most of the functions have been changed into, Ministry of Environment, and the Chinese Coast Guard, which used to be the enforcement branch of ISOA, has been, given to the military. And another development is the Office of South-North Water Transfer Project, which was in charge of transferring water resources from central China, from Hubei province and Jiangsu province, to the north, where the per capita water resources is so scarce. It was in charge of the environmental regulatory side of the diversion area under its control. Then, under this reform, these functions also changed to the hands of Ministry of Environment. So by the way, so the overall structure is still built on the framework of Ministry of Environment and Environment Protection. So the original 19 departments under MEP was still there. And so this institutional reform plan was issued in March. Now 4 months has passed. We have not seen the official report on the authority, internal departments, and internal personnel, the Sanding Fang'an yet. Though according to some news reports, the initial draft has been approved by the Ministry of Environment, and is now being reviewed by the State Council. However, on May the 7th, according to an interview with Minister Li Ganjie, the Minister of Environment, there have been progress on implementing this, institutional reform plan. First of all, the NDRC has been, being in a leading role, in handing over this authority. So the Department of Climate Change of NDRC has been incorporated into MEE. Now MEE has a new department, and the social organization previously affiliated with NDRC, its name is National Center for Climate Change Strategy and International Cooperation, NCSC, which was in charge of research and international engagement and climate change, has also been incorporated into the umbrella of MEE. And the SOA, so it's now insolvent organization. So its Department of Ecological and Environment Protection, now is under MEE also. The same thing goes with the Office of South North Water Transfer Projects. And the Ministry of Water Resources and the Ministry of Land Resources, certain personnel has also been incorporated. So I doubt, whether all the functions, have been fully integrated. What was not mentioned was what happened to the Ministry of Agriculture's enforcement and regulatory functions. But given the...
They're still walking around the halls with boxes looking for an office.
I believe so. But given the new priority, which we are going to discuss next, given to the new Ministry of Ecology and Environment, there will be 7, major enforcement campaigns, and one of the campaigns will be, targeted at agriculture and rural pollution. So, the enforcement functions of Ministry of Agriculture, will play a major role in this. So, sooner I expect, this part of function, get incorporated into MEE, really soon. And, now the Ministry of Environment has more authorities, and with the in order to incorporate this expanded, civil servants team, some sources say that Ministry of Environment needs a bigger office. So this is still unconfirmed, but some say that the new office building will be on Changwon Avenue in the very heart of the Beijing city. So this picture on the left is a current office building for some social organizations affiliated with SOA and NDRC. Back in May the 9th, when Scott Fulton, ELI president, and I were traveling in Beijing for a project, the building was still there, but when I left on May the 29th, the building was gone to make room for a new office building. And so you can see this is a Google map. It's to the southeast of Forbidden City and very close to Tiananmen Square. And it may become the neighbors of these two powerful agencies. One is the Ministry of Public Security to its west, and the Ministry of Commerce to its east. So let's see, whether the performance of this new Ministry of Ecology and Environment, can be compatible with, newly gained status and office space. So with a great authority, it comes with a great responsibility to work. So back in April, 7 major campaigns were planned for MEE, and the following, fields are the targets. Number one, air pollution is called the battle to defend blue skies, and also the diesel vehicles. After years of research, the Ministry of Environment realized, the diesel vehicle trucks, were a major contributor to both CO2 emission and NOx, and not to say PM 2.5. So the new target is against the diesel vehicles. Also, urban water pollution. So as you know, 239 of 338 bigger cities in China failed to meet, the standards, the environment standards back in 2017. So the urban water issue is still very serious. And with the incorporation of SOAs, a regulatory authority, the Bohai Sea ocean pollution issue become new target. That's the area where the ConocoPhillips oil spill happened back in 2011. The next one is the Yangtze River recovery. Due to the heavy shipping and development, the ecosystem there has been very fragile, and it's a good opportunity to take care of it. And also the source of rivers, as you know, the Mekong River, Yangtze River, and the Yellow River, all of them originate from Qinghai province on the Tibetan plateau in central to southwestern China. So to protect, these areas, ecological system and habitats are vital to, the entire watersheds of these major rivers. And the next challenge is agriculture and rural pollution. So it will, focus on, solid waste in rural areas, as well as chemical fertilizers and overuse of pesticides. And the ambitious goal is very ambitious. According to China's central leadership, the goal is to see significant, results, improvements within the next 3 years. And that's mean to say by the end of 2020. So MEE has only 3 years to prove itself. But as you can say that something is missing there. What's missing? The soil pollution was not mentioned among the 7 key targets. The official explanation is soil pollution law is still being drafted, although after 10 years of hard work. But given the seriousness of soil pollution, which is, you could say, and according to the Economist magazine survey, 16% of soil in China have been polluted to certain degrees. And such a, it's a major source of problems. So let's see, what steps will be taken to take care of it. And so Ministry of Ecology and the Environment and is a major step, but it is not one single, it's not the whole picture with this strengthening of environmental governance in China. So after this institutional reform, we noticed that the following changes. First of all, the annual environment conference in Beijing, normally only attended by minister level officials, attended by Xi Jinping and another 5 Politburo standing committee members. So the conference was held in May, and it was very significant. It symbolizes the great attention from the political leadership and shows political will to tackle the pollution problems. And back in July, the Standing Committee of National People's Congress, which is the national legislature, passed a resolution on the war against pollution. So this time, a lot of content of this resolution focused on using rule of law. So connecting to the earlier proposal to set up a nationwide environment enforcement team, it seems to indicate that these enforcement efforts will be more aligned with the current legal framework, such as administrative procedure law and administrative penalty law. thus promote transparency and predictability. And also, early this week, actually on Tuesday, the Vice Premier, Mr. Han Zheng, was named as the chair of the task force on combating air pollution in Beijing, Tianjin, Hebei province, and nearby provinces. And this committee is in charge of the air pollution enforcement, and the 3 deputy chairs are the Environment Minister Li Ganjie, the Beijing Mayor Dr. Chen Jining, and the Hebei Province Governor. So now this enforcement leadership has been upgraded, and at least shows great attention from the central government. Even if there may be still uncertainties on whether they can achieve this ambitious 3-year goal or their longer goal to achieve make sustainable development really happen. At least the following uncertainties are right there. First of all, regardless of the central level reorganization, the provincial and the local levels branches of Ministry of Environment, are still understaffed and underfunded. A lot of the ambitious efforts requires funding and personnel and training. We worked with the Ministry of Environment on developing a permitting system covering all the point sources in China, and the ministry people have been asking us how to use meager resources to make it happen. And our president, Mr. Scott Fulton, the EPA former general counsel, was very confirming on that. You need really resources, money and budget and people, good people, regardless of the political will to make it happen. Furthermore, it's also uncertain on how the regulatory authority in the provinces are going to integrate. So at the central level, it takes several months to integrate all those functions from 6 agencies. What will happen, in the local levels? I noticed, some municipal city level integration plan, but the new local Bureau of Environment, still called Bureau of Environment Protection, and some is and in this in this plan released in April, it doesn't mention any agriculture, ocean, or other function integration. So let's see what will happen. In China, the enforcement work is largely on the shoulders of provincial and city governments. With only central attention, that will be good, but it's not enough. So we'll keep a close eye on it. And furthermore, China's economy, has been growing rapidly in the past, 4 decades. However, there are, the economy is showing signs of being slowed down due to their most domestic problem, like, the heavily indebted local governments and, companies, as well as the worsening international trade relations. So there is a still big question mark on whether the strong political will is going to survive a slower economic growth or not. So it seems that the central government is very committed to environment protection, but as the economy may take a hit from various factors, it's really a test for China at this moment. So let me invite Dr. Hu Tao, WWF, to continue our discussion. Thank you very much.
And Hu Tao, it's a chair's dream. He has 1 slide. I liked your slides. Nothing against your slides, but it's like 1 slide, and then she's actually going to do no slides. You guys ready for that? All right.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. Very nice back to Woodrow Wilson Center and China Environment Forum. Continue to talk about environment governance.
Stay close. It's webcasting.
Yes. My name is Hu Tao, not Hu Jintao. So I'm not a person to initiate the reform. Instead, I'm going to interpret it. What are the reasons behind the dragons merged together? So that's my job today. So The most important change is NDRC. The climate change department is going to completely move together with the National Center for Climate Change Strategy and International Cooperation. Earlier, Josh mentioned, together moved from NDRC to MEP. Very often in my office, my colleagues ask me, does it mean China weakened the climate change? They sort of see NDRC is the most powerful ministerial level organization in the cabinet. Move out from NDRC to MEE is getting weaker. So actually, for me, I thought it's opposite. It's getting stronger. The reason not only Josh mentioned MEE now is going to relocate it to the Chang'an Avenue. At least it's equivalent to US EPA here as a constitutional avenue, right? And the more important, I found this is, the leadership, the climate change view, how they look at the climate change. In the past, if you recall the Chinese official statement, when they're talking about climate change, often say climate change is an environmental issue, is both an environment issue and development issue. But more important is development issue. They mentioned the second part. The emphasis climate change is development issue because of energy consumption. So this time, they shift from development commission to environmental ministry. That means they really look at climate change as an environment issue. That's my interpretation. It's changed the mindset of Chinese climate change policy in the future, I guess. And the more important, I found the advantage is finally the SO2 and the CO2 can be under the same ministry to be controlled. Used to be they separately do, each ministry, they're following their own mandate to do what they want to do. Like MEP before, they issued the policy to reduce sulfur dioxide and the NOx reduction policy. And years ago, in order to reduce 1 ton of sulfur dioxide in the power sector, actually is going to increase 5.4 tons of carbon. Because of the chemical reaction, because of the energy consumption to run the deforestation equipment, not only in China, US, same. But at that time, MEP didn't care because my mandate is to reduce sulfur, NOx, PM, not carbon. But now, so under the climate change department is under the same ministry with the air pollution department. I had a meeting when I was in Beijing during my trip last month with the Department of Climate Change, with the National Center for Climate Strategy and International Cooperation. So they are right now so eager, to combine climate change reduction and air pollution reduction together because they want to mainstream into the ministry's job. Otherwise, they are going to be marginalized, they thought. So they are much more active than before. I have been, Jennifer actually is doing the Nexus work, climate change, water and food, energy, and I'm a little bit narrow trying to study on the co-control issue, co-control of air pollutants and greenhouse gas emission. Even 2 decades ago started. And in the past, by the way, I'm a veteran of MEP. That's why I saw, that's the reason Jennifer asked me to have the interpretation. So when I worked for the ministry, MEP, that time I was so hard to talk with climate change department of NDRC. See, this is very important co-benefits. Why don't we use one stone to kill two birds? That time I mentioned so many times, but they don't care. They said, this is not my job. My job is climate change. Now this time, so I'm so welcome. They ask me, so tell me how to do it. Because in the China's New Air Act, co-control is already in the New Air Act. Article 2 is about a co-control of air pollutants and greenhouse gas emission together.
So I need to say gongxi, gongxi. After 20 years, they finally listened to
Finally. Finally, yeah. I think that's a very significant change, when the climate change department shifted from NDRC to MEP. To MEE, sorry.
I know.
Yeah, to me, not me. Another very important is the Ministry of Ag. Now, their agricultural, rural, and environment pollution departments has been shifted to MEE as well. In the past, actually, between the two ministries, they often debated each other. Who should take the responsibility? Who should take the lead of non-point source pollution? And after harvesting the straw burning issue and the rural garbage management issue, those are, between the two ministries, they fight each other. But now it's clear, so it's all moved to MEE. And I guess maybe the only one person is unhappy with this decision is Mr. Trump. The reason is when Trump started, now we can see trade war, right? When Trump started the trade war, at that time within China, as I know, they also had a debate. They wanted to import more the American beef, pork, chicken. Minister of Ag, that time they're still, that's before March, they are still, in charge of the livestock industry and the rural environment issue. So they actually not much care about the rural environment, but livestock industry for them is very important. When China decided to import more beef, pork, chicken, they said, no way, because we want to protect our farmers' business. This is the Minister of Ag's view. However, MEP that time said, this is the most welcome. If we import more American beef, pork, chicken, that's a great contribution to reduce non-point source pollution in China. We're most welcome. This is MEP's view. Now, so this is two ministries, they fight each other in the cabinet meeting. But now this part of the responsibility has been moved to MEE. Now in another same ministry. I think that will be easier, but maybe now the current trade war is being dramatically changed. So we don't know. China's continued to import more such a kind of beef and pork and chicken from U.S. or not.
Well, the chicken feet too, right? That is one area where we have a surplus.
Yeah.
We send them our chicken feet.
That's definitely. Chicken feet in China is always deficit. China not only imports from U.S., also from Brazil, from Argentina, from Paraguay, those countries. I guess, none of the countries in the world, they eat chicken feet except China.
Except China. It's like,
And the South-North Water Transfer Committee. Yes.
Stay by the mic.
Yes, sorry. Yeah. Environmental protection responsibility has been moved from this commission to MEE, to me. In the past, a lot of debates about whether the project is significant or not. The Minister of Water Resources only calculated the economic benefits. People later realized for this north-south water transportation transfer project, they found the water transfer from south to north is polluted water. Why we people use polluted water? You spend so much energy to transfer the water, the polluted water from south to north. It doesn't make any sense. But this time they really changed the dragon structure. Let this environmental protection department of this commission to MEE. Marine is another one, and State Oceanic Administration used to also have very often fighting each other with MEP. That time, the State Oceanic Administration argued the marine pollution meaning is a pollution, a land-based pollution from the land. And the MEP that time argued, no, mainly from aquaculture in the coastal area, and mainly from the oil industry. Those two ministries fighting each other. Now it's only one dragon. So maybe debate within the MEE, not between the ministries. And Ministry of Water Resources, we already know that Jennifer has done her PhD dissertation on the water issue. That time, even, it's clear that time, I guess.
Yeah. My anecdote was I was in my dissertation research. I was interviewing these guys in, I think this was in Shaoxing from the local water bureau, and right outside the window, you could lean out and touch the local environmental protection bureau. And so in the course of the interview, I said, "Hey, so do you guys work with them?" And they kind of looked at each other and said, "Oh, that's the EPB." I mean, there was no, and then when they said, "Oh yeah, no, we don't work with them." So yeah, that was insightful.
Yeah, that time, Environment Protection Department or Bureau of NEPA or SEPA, that time MEP, is responsible for water quality. So, and MWR, Ministry of Water Resources, was responsible for the water quantity issue. But still, for the watershed, small tribunals, who is taking the responsibility? Now, this time is clarify the responsibility. Environmental related issues still, the water quality related still should be taking responsibility by me. Not me, actually, MEE.
Made that joke already.
And Ministry of National Land Resources, the underground water issue is another one. It used to be in Shandong years ago, some scandal are reported. Some factories, the media said, inject the polluted river into the groundwater, down to the ground, but not exactly injection. Is because this is used coal mining of some mines. Yeah. They just take the advantage to pull the polluted water into the mine. So now, that time, very often when the MEP push harder to the polluters, they cannot discharge the water. So they just put
into the surface water.
Yeah.
But I'm going to jump in with a quick question, because a lot of times with, because MEP was responsible for surface water, and so while we sometimes question the accuracy, there was a fair amount of data on surface water. There is a fair amount of data on surface water pollution. But groundwater, you always hear strange things. They say, it's very polluted. Okay, is that because the Ministry of Land and Resources, because they didn't really measure the water quality?
They measure, but
they don't want to talk about it.
They actually somehow, if that's their responsibility, they would deny. No, that's not serious.
问题不大, okay.
问题不大. It is, yeah. That's their argument. But still, for them, this is a very minor issue in the whole responsibility of MWR. So that's actually the situation. So now it's being underground water issue being moved to MEE as well. So this is the new structure. I'm thinking any other dragons are missing? So I found one of the most important issue I have been working on, but not being this reform has not been touched yet. That is really ecology issue or ecosystem management issue. So the biodiversity is still unclear who should take the responsibility. National parks, natural reserves, who should really take the responsibility? Still, about most of the national reserves are under state forestry administration, the new name, state forestry and grassland administration. And still some are under MEP and MEE now, still unclear. And the biodiversity, taking the CBD 2020 as an example, CBD Convention on Biodiversity is going to have another COP15, Conference of Parties 15 meeting to be held in Beijing. It's called, for short, I would call it CBD 2020. 2020 is going to be held in Beijing. MEE right now is taking a lead to organize the CBD 2020. But what's the role of SFGA? No, the
Okay,
new
alphabet soup, spell it out. So State Forestry Administration.
State Forestry and Grassland Administration.
Okay,
So,
I'll make sure. Okay.
so and they also have another head, National Park Services, equivalent with our colleagues, NPS. See, still unclear. So, I mean, still have some responsibilities in charge of biodiversity, natural reserves. They didn't specifically mention as national parks, but related. So that's, I think, a big dragon still missing. How can we manage that? So I don't exactly know. So I'm still, yesterday I hosted a CSCD delegation.
Yep.
I still talked with them. I said, hey, this is also another part to be reformed. We should work together, maybe for next government reform.
They'll listen to you in 20 years.
that I don't hope that take that long. You know, that time I will be retired.
Okay.
And this is, I think, just give you a snapshot about the reform. And generally, I would say the new reform is being improved the internal administrative governance issue within the cabinet. Already, Zhuoshi already shows the significance, how the inspection team being enhanced, the air quality at least obviously being improved, not as that as dramatically, but it's been improving for sure. And I often told Jennifer I'm here as an environment refugee because of the better air quality in Beijing. That's why I escaped and moved to DC, staying here as an environment refugee. But continue, if the trends is being continued, I guess, you know, it's about the time, maybe for 5 or 10 years, about the time for me to go back to home.
All right. Awesome.
That's my hope. Thank you very much.
Thanks. You can talk there, yeah. So, rampant anecdotalism here. All right. Liu Shuang, and I'll. Do you want this slide up, or do you want the dragons?
It doesn't.
I'll give you the dragons.
Well, thanks, Jennifer, for the invitation. And before I start the sharing, just a couple of quick words on Energy Foundation China. I'm based in Beijing, suffering from air quality on most days during the year. And we are a groundbreaking foundation, and we have this opportunity and honor to work with many of our partners. And I'm from the program of low carbon economic growth, which covers to increase China's ambition on carbon emission at Paris Agreement, and carbon trading, carbon tax, and environmental tax, and the other economic policies in environmental field, as well as climate and green finance. And today I'm going to focus on 3 points under the theme of governance. First is some quick and basic facts about the national carbon trading in China, and to share some insights from us. Second, using carbon trading as one example, I'd like to elaborate some of the potential scenarios of the national ETS emission trading schemes governance under the new Ministry of Ecology and Environment. And third, I'm going to quickly touch upon some broader and more cross-cutting and definitely cross-agency environmental related policies. Well, first on national carbon trading, as Zhuo Shi has brought up, it was officially launched last December after the work plan being approved by the State Council. Back at the time, it was the Department of Climate Change within NDRC who is the policy maker and regulator and the implementer of the national carbon trading system. And nowadays, it will be the Department of Climate Change under the new MEE. The national carbon trading in China will start from the power sector. And by power sector itself, the national carbon trading system in China is already the world's largest carbon trading system. And it will cover approximately 1/3 of China's total carbon emission. That means it will cover around 3.3 billion tons of CO2 emission. And that will be, for comparison, it will be more than 1.5 times of the emission covered by EU's carbon trading system, EU ETS, and it will be more than 8 times of the coverage of the carbon market in California. Just some very quick facts about the carbon market plan in China. And I want to point out that we truly believe that carbon trading is one key milestone on the climate change mitigation plan in China. And it will be a centerpiece of China's mitigation policies on climate change, because we don't think that carbon trading alone will be able to keep China on the trajectory of the 2.2 degree scenarios in Paris Agreement. But however, many of the features and building blocks of carbon trading will help the climate regulators in China to improve the carbon governance in China. For instance, under a carbon trading, several key elements that the government has to decide and also implement include cap setting, to allocate allowances to covered entities or emitters. And third, the MRV, the monitoring, the measurement, reporting, and verification of entity-level carbon emission data. On carbon setting, I think most of us are aware that China has made its commitment to peak its carbon emission in absolute terms around 2030. And how the cap setting will be done within the national carbon market will help to inform the policymakers on where the nationwide cap should be. So that's one information and useful experiences that the national carbon trading can contribute to other carbon policies. Second, on the allowance allocation. It's within the current practices in China, for instance, on the energy-intensive targets or the carbon-intensive target. That means, well, how much carbon are you supposed to emit for per unit of GDP? All those intensive targets are set in a way by the central government. And the central government will set region-specific targets for regional governments, where in turn the regional governments will distribute those targets among companies. And in most cases, the current process is not really that transparent. But however, under the national carbon trading, the allowances will be allocated according to a unified standards set by the central government. And it's the responsibility of regional government who are going to allocate the allowances to each companies according to this unified standards set up by the central government. And this process is supposed to be more transparent and not accurate but fair, and also more scientific in a way that's taking many considerations, taking many facts into consideration. Third, on the carbon emission data, or the MRV. It's before that we have a national carbon trading, and certainly before we had this carbon trading pilots in China starting from 2012. There was no data systematically collected on the entity level. And but with the national carbon trading on the table, Department of Climate Change was able to collect 3 years of carbon emission data on the entity level. And regardless of how soon a carbon market will be functioning in China, those information, those entity-level carbon emission information will be very valuable for the carbon policy regulators to help them with the other policies, maybe not on carbon trading itself, but for the other energy-intensive targets or the absolute carbon emission target that's under discussion. Those will be very valuable assets that policymakers can take away from a carbon trading in China. And some further insights I want to share is maybe that's been discussed widely on the media, that the current design of the national carbon trading in China is now very ambitious. And it's actually a kind of a balance to Department of Climate Change. It's a balance between how ambitious we want to be on climate targets and also and the possibly negative impacts on the economy resulted from national carbon trading. And so the rationale is that either we have a perfect national carbon trading system at the beginning, but with very little buy-in from the other ministries, or we can have a system in place which can be up for reform and revise in the future, but with reasonable support from the other ministries so we can have a carbon trading at all. And that is actually the case in China, and it's, the current design is kind of a compromise between the ambition on climate change and the buy-in from the other ministries as well as the society and public. Second point I want to share is, as I mentioned, to balance out those different concerns, the current design is very conservative, and it's unlikely to send sufficient incentives for the emitters to do real reduction in the near future. But however, I think we should also emphasize on what's going to happen in the long term as a result from a tool as a carbon trading. And like many other existing carbon trading systems, for instance, in EU and California, they all went through stages where serious reform will happen at later stages or phases based on the experiences they've learned in early phases. And I think that will be very likely be the case in China. And the key is to make sure that we will have a mechanism in place at the very beginning. And the mechanism and also protocols on how the national carbon trading will be monitored, reviewed, and revised in the future will be very well communicated to the covered enterprises as well as the public, so that those whose emission behavior we want to change will be able to have a sense of the long-term stable signal of what's going to happen in the future. And then while seeing what's going to happen in the future will help them to change their investment decisions, which are happening nowadays. So to have a system in place on how the national carbon trading will be revised will be a key to realize the long-term strategic objective of a carbon trading in China. And second point I want to focus on is to use the carbon trading as an example of how a governance of a market-based instrument on environmental field can be in China. Firstly, the colleagues here also brought up the role of a higher leadership oversight on many environmental policies, and certainly including the carbon trading. Is the nature of carbon trading will have to be the agreement among different ministries and agencies. So have a higher level body will be able to provide the strategic guidance and also to facilitate the cross-agency dialogues, which are very much needed by a successful carbon trading in China. And also have a higher leadership engaged in carbon trading process will be able to speed up the legal mandate process, which is currently missing at the carbon trading system in China. And secondly, I want to bring up the differentiation between central government and regional governments in the governance of carbon trading, but that also certainly applies to many other environmental policies. The question I want to raise is that for China's national carbon trading, which is going to cover more than 7,000 companies, and that will cover all the regions across China, again, that means it's going to put regulation on 3.3 billion tons of carbon dioxide. How many staff, full-time staff, we have at the Department of Climate Change who work on carbon trading, both in terms of design and implementation? My math is less than 5 people at the Department of Climate Change, and I don't have access to their time sheet, but if I have to speculate, it's somewhere between 4.3 to 5 people who are working full-time on carbon trading.
So it's kind of like 1 person per billion tons of carbon. All right. That's a light lift.
So efficient.
Well, they will have to work probably 70 hours a day in order to make a successful carbon trading. But that means with the central government or central regulatory agency seriously understaffed, it has to be a coordination and collaboration between the central government and regional government to make sure not only the design of the carbon trading will work, but more importantly, the operation, the implementation, and the enforcement of carbon trading will be working in reality. And I also want to point out there's a broader political reform in China, and the mission is to have a relatively smaller government instead of a larger one. So there's kind of a cap on how many more staffs that each government agency or ministry can ask for. While within the current constraint, it's very unlikely that, we don't know yet about MEE, but it's very unlikely that the Department of Climate Change will be able to have much more headcounts than it currently has to implement and operate in national carbon trading. So that's why that I mentioned the allowance allocation under the carbon trading. The current design will be the central government set the standards, but it will have to rely on regional governments to really do the job of allocate allowances to companies. And also the regional government will also take the responsibility of collecting and quickly verifying the data reported by companies. And also the regional government will be in charge of the reporting system on carbon data in general. Lastly, on the governance of the carbon trading is, as Dr. Hu has brought up, that having climate change merged into MEE, it's one of the biggest changes under the current reform. And I want to just very quickly look into some potential overlapping of the regulatory feature of a carbon trading with the MEE's conventional function. Well, again, a question I want to ask is what's the nature of, or what's the legal base of a carbon allowances? This is still actually controversial in many existing carbon trading systems. I don't think EU has a decision on how it wants to define the legal nature of a carbon allowances. But within the current regulatory framework in China, I want to argue that one scenario we can have is to phrase carbon allowances as the administrative permit or the local pollution. Within the current framework under MEE, it has the responsibility to issue and manage the local pollution discharge permit. And that means that MEE is charged of issuing the permit to those companies who emit local pollutant, and also it's supposed to manage and check the actual emission against what's allowed on the permit. And also MEE is responsible to make all those information publicly available on the website. One example that's happening is we're talking a lot about water pollution here. It's MEE has this office of local pollution emission permit, it's going to have a QR code to all the pipelines emitting water pollution in China. And all that for citizens, all you can do is just to scan the QR code on the pipeline and to check out the information on how much they are supposed to emit and what the actual emission is on a yearly basis, and very likely more often than, well, maybe on a quarterly basis.
Would you use this? Would you use your WeChat app, or is does MEE going to have their own app for you to scan this stuff?
I don't think they have their own.
Just curious. See, clearly, I'm not the tech person on the panel here, but that is awesome.
The hub for all the information will be a website because, well, for all the information that's intensive, I don't think WeChat is a combination of Facebook, WhatsApp, and Apple Pay, a very popular app in China. So I don't think, I think we will need a lot more space than just the screen on my phone to read the information. But I want to point out this is actually the largest information platform available on environmental emission data. And so those features I described about how the permit on local pollution has been managed under MEE, I think that's very likely they can adopt to carbon trading, because that's actually just the nature of how carbon allowances will be allocated and how like MRV of carbon emission will be carried out. And having an existing legal basis will actually help the Department of Climate Change to enforce a carbon trading with all the legitimate reasons. And the last point, a theme I want to cover is the cross-agency policies and some of their governance. Well, we have seen recently there's a trend of adopting more market-based instruments or economic policies on top of command and control environmental regulations in China. And even though that many of the functions that colleagues have mentioned have been streamlined into MEE, but when we are going to explore more market-based instrument, there will be a lot more cross-cutting with many other non-environmental regulatory agencies. For instance, the physical policy regulators, the financial market regulators, and those on taxation and economic policies. I've used two examples here to elaborate it. First, on the financial regulation. Again, that's actually related to carbon trading. As for carbon trading, or the other name of cap and trade, cap is very much related to the environmental effectiveness of carbon trading, and that's regulated by the Department of Climate Change. But for the trading part, it's identified as a commodity exchange or trading in China. That means it's subject to China Securities Regulatory Commission, which is one of the financial regulatory agencies in China. And CSRC, or China Securities Regulatory Commission, have it's based on a risk-based approach to regulate the financial market. So anything is risky considered by them will be under a very strict supervision. And while at the current carbon trading pilots level, we have, for all the pilots, there are carbon trading exchanges, which subject to the Security Regulatory Commission's supervision. And actually, some of them were caught fail to comply with the Security Regulatory Commission's requirements by trying to increase the liquidity of the carbon market in China. So while we are trying to use more financial tools to help with the environmental regulation, we'll have to pay attention to the existing and probably broader regulation on the financial market, so we don't really encounter more conflict between those two different main sides and policymakers. Second example I want to give will be on the environmental taxes and how that justify the collaboration between the Environmental Protection Agency and the state administration of taxation. That will be the Chinese version of IRS. So environmental tax became effective starting from January this year. It replaced the emission charges fee that started from 1982. The differences of the governance between those two systems will be, while the old discharge fee is very much mostly carried out by Ministry of Environmental Protection. the revenue collected has been collected by the Ministry of Environmental Protection and the local environmental protection bureaus, local EPBs. Under the new environmental protection taxes, the case will be the state administration of taxation and also the local levels, local counterparts will take the responsibility of collecting the revenue on environmental protection taxes. And the difference and what's implication that we can take is that while to state administration of taxation doesn't have capacity, in particular the technical capacity on the emission data. So in the law, it's very specifically required to have an exchange system between the state administration of taxation and MEE, so that state administration of taxation will have accurate data shared from MEE to cross-check it with the taxation-related data reported by companies. And like IRS in the States, state administration of taxation, it's one of the most powerful administration agencies in China. So having such a strong and powerful agency on board on carbon environmental taxes can be a new form of governance to increase the enforcement capacity of environmental protection, Ministry of Ecology and Environment. Actually, there is a third example I want to make on the new cross-agency governance. It's on the environmental risk assessment. So most of the examples I have shared so far is mostly on the regulatory part of the environmental governance on the policies and actions. And I think there are more and more demands from the market and also from the users to for the government and the agencies to provide an enabling role in this field. Environmental risk assessment is basically the rationale of how we can mainstream environmental and climate issues into the daily basis decision-making process of financial institutions. And most of us who are sitting here are so aware of many environmental conditions and policies. But for financial institutions, at least those whom we talk to in China, we were actually very surprised of how little they know about either the policies and enforcement and how that's going to affect their investment whom they are going to make the day after tomorrow. And that's going to lock their investment and portfolio for the coming decades. And that's so caused stringent assets becoming an increasing concern in financial institutions. So that's why there are many initiatives, while you may have seen different names of it. It can be called environmental risk assessment. It can be called the stress testing on the environmental policies by banks and financial institutions. It can be under the name of TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Risk Disclosure. The whole idea of that initiative is how we can quantify and monitorize the impacts from other existing environmental policies. The environmental policies, we know that's going to happen because there are overall targets on certain environmental quality. And how we can translate those boring and wonky policy terms into something that financial institutions will be able to integrate it into their policy, into their decision-making process. And that's where I think some enabling conditions can be provided by either the government or some of the other organizations. For instance, when we're talking to the Chinese banks, two major gaps that some of the Chinese banks are facing. One on a mapping of what policies are in place. And for instance, for the climate policy, we know that we're talking about 2-degree scenario. And what will be the implication on the policies will be in place in the next decade? And how that will affect my investment that will still be in operation by then. And so to provide a very comprehensive database on the policy and also the implication in terms of the costs or the compliance costs, operation costs, that will be something very helpful to the financial institutions. And the second is on the data, where they can have the data available. We described the permit information data that will be available on the website and probably on the WeChat. And for the financial institutions, it's very difficult for them just to use kind of the distributed and segmented data like those. They'll have to batch the data together so the headquarters of those financial institutions can easily adopt the environmental data available from outside to fit into their own system. And we haven't, so far, most of the environmental data governance system is to increase the accuracy and also to make the data available for the public so that we can monitor and improve the data quality. But thinking about the financial institutions who are going to make a lot of difference if they are willing to take those into consideration. And for those users, what kind of format that should be provided to facilitate the use of the data at financial institutions? We haven't had a solution yet, but I have seen many initiatives and efforts put into place to help with those enabling conditions and to facilitate the extra efforts. That's it, what I'm going to share for now.
And, yeah. And clearly, I mean, the Energy Foundation China, I mean, they've been amazing in the 12 years now, China? How many years you guys been in China?
We started we started our Beijing office in 1999.
Oh, okay.
So that's a
Even
lot
longer.
more than,
Yeah,
my
that's
math is bad.
long as mine.
Almost 20 years.
Yeah, well, that's right. So, I came here and they went to Beijing. This is good. But so you and and we can maybe take some questions on this because the Energy Foundation, you guys are also starting to support projects on green finance and green banking. And just as a side note, on the 26th this month, surprise, we're going to have China's first all green bank come, the Ma'ashan Rural Development Bank. And so we're going to talk about green buildings. I'll tell you more later. All right, I'm going to open up for questions out here because I'm going to, and I'll interject whenever I want to because I can do that. So raise your hand, and what I'd like to do, I want to collect 2 questions each time. And let's see, we'll take 2 over here. Take the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, we'll start here. 1, 2. Need a mic. Oh, no, this side first. Sorry, I confused you with my pointing. We'll start here. 1, 2. I don't know why, just because I know this ocean guy coming here. So you saw them perk up when you mentioned State Oceanic Administration, right?
Mm-hmm. Hello, Philip Cho with Oceana Senior Advisor. My question is, with the creation of MEE, we didn't really talk about fisheries. So I would, for many of the panelists, I would like to hear what your thoughts are on the impact of both domestic and distant water fleets as you see through the lens of the MEE. Thank you.
Okay, that was one. And my second question back there. Let's pass it over.
Thank you. Caroline Black, I'm an intern with Climate Leadership Council, and I've read up on sub-categorization within of performance standards within sectors covered under the ETS, and I'd like to know more about what the criteria for setting performance standards would be for different companies as part of the sub-categorization.
Okay, yeah, well, so let's start with the fishery, that's kind of like, because we were talking about beheaded dragons, fighting dragons, fat dragons, and this is one of the missing dragons, maybe. All right, what do you got here for me? The fishery question?
Yes. I think the fishery right now is still under the responsibilities of Ministry of Ag. There are still the fishery administration still existing under the Ministry of Ag. By the way, they're also changing the name. Ministry of Agricultural and Rural Affairs. This is a new name. So that means in the future, the new Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs are taking more social and economic, not an environment. Environment completely move out. But it's the distant fleeting issue somehow is related to MEE. The reason is for you probably know better than me, for the distant fleeting, the farmers, the fishermen get a lot of subsidies for the diesel. That's, from my view, that's somehow against the China's climate change policy. The climate department right now is in MEE. So we probably should change the policy. That's my personal view on this issue. Yeah.
But the Ministry of Ag and Rural Affairs, they would. I mean, when I think of fisheries, I'm also thinking of aquaculture as well. Would that would fall under them
Yeah.
as well? But not. But then a lot of these aquaculture, both coastal and otherwise, they do produce pollution.
It is, yeah.
But you're saying
If the pollution, that's still MEE, already mentioned, used to be,
Yeah.
State Oceanic Administration. Now it's MEE. Yeah.
Okay, well, good. So now just to switch gears from fish to climate, Liu Shuang, the question about the performance standards in the ETS.
Well, yes. Basically, the performance-based standards the idea is the same as the benchmarking used in California and EU markets. So the idea is that based on how efficient those covered entities are, the more efficient you are, the more free allowances you are going to get. And two factors will affect how many allowances it will get. Is the efficiency as well as the production. Is how many products you are going to produce during the compliance period. And while actually the details of the cap setting and allowances haven't been finalized and not published in China, so there are still intensive discussions happening on what's the best way to go. And I will personally argue that it will, regardless what's going to be in the near future, it will have to be a cap-based allowances allocation and trading in the future, because it's not really a technical issue. For instance, I mentioned that China is going to peak its carbon emission by around 2030. There will be a level of where the peak will be, and that can relatively easy to translate that into the cap covering the national trading. Also, there are many other non-carbon policies in place, for instance, on the coal consumption cap, as well as the energy, absolute energy consumption targets. And those are the basis where the carbon trading palette setting process can be based on.
Okay, good. All right, so then this is 3 and then 4.
Yes, I'm Dr. Sam Hancock of Emerald Planet TV, and I started working with China in 1973. So we've been 45 years now working in this area, not just with China, but around the globe. But going to having this long history, and I applaud you for all these new changes that are happening, creating the new ministry and all that. But how do you monitor and or encourage the interaction between the central government, the state government, the ministry, and all of these local governments? It's very diverse. People think, it's top-down decision-making and rules, yet there's, in a sense, great autonomy, and not always people reporting to Beijing as they probably should. So instead of the stick, what's the carrots in all this that people want to participate? They want to encourage addressing environmental issues at the local level and contribute to the broad national perspective, which I greatly admire with the direction you're going as you go towards 2030 and 2050.
Okay, good.
Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, and the gentleman behind.
Hi, Jock Whittlesey from the State Department. A quick question for Mr. Leo. You mentioned the 7 campaigns. Is that organized by the MEE or is that organized by the State Council? Thank you.
Okay, with these 2 questions, I think on the first one, I think to maybe kind of hone it in a little bit, because I was actually thinking this too, because he's actually, you mentioned here, it's going to be really hard to take this streamlining down to the local level. And that's kind of what you're getting to, is that, is it going to be carrots, is it going to be sticks? And I was kind of wondering, and it links to your question too, like, do you think that maybe with these campaigns, like, do you think they're going to try to focus on maybe integrating it around maybe let's do it on air first? I mean, because there's a lot of moving parts to bringing these bureaucracies together. You can do it on top, and seriously, they are carrying their boxes of stuff. Well, the building's not built yet, but it'll be built by next week. So can you kind of dab and Hu Tao and you guys can jump in on this too. It's more about how do you take this integration, this more holistic model? How do you go local?
Okay, I'll try to answer these 2 questions, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Hu and Director Liu.
Nali.
So the first one is to 2 points to raise. Number one, for the how to encourage or penalize the local governments for doing or failing to do. One reform which is being pushed through in China is to integrate the management of provincial and local level Bureau of Environment Protection. So in the past, the local or until recently, most enforcement and monitoring work has been handled by the local level BEPs. Those BEPs are very low ranking and they budget controlled by the local government, whose primary focus is on jobs, taxation, and economic growth. So that means these local BEPs are tending to be understaffed and underfunded, and their enforcement work has been proving to be not ideal. So one reform has been pushed through by the MEE is to giving to let the provincial department of environment protection more resources and more direct control on these local level BEPs. So that there's supposed to be several objectives. Number one, to try to avoid as much as possible the local protectionism or the local intervention on the enforcement and monitoring work. And second, is the provincial DEPs tend to be better financed and have closer ties to the central level Ministry of Environment. And I think this as a practical, first step, this is, leading the train of the future. And another point I want to, discuss with you is, yes, in practice, there are some innovative ways to make sure the accountability, assurance. For example, the river chief or the lake chief system. It was, started a few years ago. The general idea is a provincial governor, say, or the party secretary of the province. You're responsible for a river or lake within your administrative jurisdiction. If something terribly happened to the water, like or a river passes through 3 provinces, but one chunk of it is in your province. If serious pollution incident happened to the part of the river under your control, then you will be held responsible. So probably you will not be prosecuted, but since you are not the polluter and you are not the head of the BEP, but your promotion may be affected, regardless how many tax dollars you create, how many jobs you create. So that has been, that reform has been, showing some good results. So I think this is my initial answer to your questions. And for the questions from the gentleman from the State Department, my understanding is 7 campaigns were proposed by the State Council, at least the State Council. The document was issued, from the State Council, but probably there are even higher, authorities backing these efforts. So, but it's definitely not the ministry level decisions.
Okay, so some other next duet. We said we'd bounce back over here. How about these? So Hu Tao. All right, yeah, Hu Tao. What you got to say?
So, before answer his question, I even have a question to Josh.
Yeah, go for it.
So, river chief system, right, is popular. My question is, who is the chief of Yellow River? Who is the chief of Yangtze River? You can think about it and answer later. Okay.
Yeah. Well, but actually, with that, but the river chief system is more is strangely is trying to divide up segments.
Both.
They're both, yeah.
Segments and tribunals. Yeah.
Yeah. So just like we're doing some research on that. We'll know more soon.
And so skip the sticks, carrots. So I think financial carrots, I would say, green finance. Joshua already mentioned. MIIT, Ministry of Information and Industrial, and what's the name?
Industry.
Information
Technology.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. They also provide grants or loans or credits for the companies for their technology innovation or improvement. NDRC, same. They have such a kind of financial mechanism. And shaming and naming. So they have the system, like a MEP before, they have the ranking system, who is the greenest the city, who is somehow by the pollution, air pollution, who is the worst the city, shaming and naming. That's also encourage the cities to take actions. The more important, the third one, is the Communist Party official performance evaluation system, 中组部 in Chinese. 中组部 have the officials' performance evaluation. If you have done a good job, you can have the chance to be upgrade. In the past, the key indicators, GDP, is also economic, but since years ago, it's completely changed. Even environmental indicator is more important than economic. That's really encourage the local officials to take action. That's a short answer.
Yeah, but I have to interject. We had lunch beforehand and with speakers and a few other folks, and one thing that came up in the conversation was that with all this, quick environmental action, that maybe the law is being forgotten. We didn't solve that problem at lunch, did we?
We discussed on that, but the laws actually sometimes not totally consistent with the policies say,
Yeah.
or what really happened on the front at the local level.
But when our me dragon gets strong, there's hope. Yeah, we're jury's out. All right, how about Laura and then this gentleman, and then we'll do three. We'll do a troika.
Does this work?
Yeah.
Hi, Laura Matthews. This is a follow-up on the carrot and stick question. So with the reorganization and with this renewed emphasis or heightened emphasis, how do you think provincial and local officials will be measured, and what will their incentives be? So is success for them X number of violations cited, X dollars in penalties, X number of officials jailed? Or is success, more likely to really look at the environmental measures?
That's a tough question. All right, this gentleman and then Judy.
Thank you. My name's Charlie Vest. I'm an intern at the National Bureau of Asian Research. My question is a follow-up on cross-agency policies for Ms. Liu. So can you talk a little bit about the progress of reforms that are being conducted by the National Energy Administration on creating a more market-based and transparent power sector regime that to bring about a lower carbon power sector? Thanks.
Yep, and then Judy.
Yeah, hi, I'm Judy Shapiro, and my question is for
From
Hutao.
American University.
From American University.
She writes great books on China's environment.
I work for them, but I represent my to what extent is the newly organized me able to supervise any of China's global environmental footprint? How does that interface, the domestic and the international? That's my question.
Could be another missing dragon. All right. What do we want to start out with? How about let's continue with the Lars question about the provincial and local officials in terms of what they're measured. Because Hutao said, they get their promotions, but is it promotions for just, how many people got jailed for not doing the policy? Or,
Okay, I'll go first. So thank you, Laura. And so I'll try to answer your question for how the provincial and local officials are tested on their environmental performance. So according to the public sources and our discussion with Ministry of Environment officials who actually was sent to Hebei, Henan provinces on the inspection tours, so they tend to focus more on the attainment, the air quality attainment rates of these regions. But at the same time, in this reports filed by the Ministry of Environment, there's other indicators are listed, such as how many people were jailed, investigated on the polluter company size, and how many officials were demoted because they failed to enforce environmental laws before this inspection tour started, or who's failing to enforce caused this failure to attain environmental standards. So I guess in practice, both are looked at as a part of the evaluation system. So Dr. Hu, do you have?
Yeah. Besides, Josh said, I think another very important information being collected is ambient air quality, water quality, soil contamination. So those are objective standards that's easily to be collected. There, in generally, in China, there are two monetary data collection systems: national monetary stations and the local monetary stations. National monetary stations are really, independent, controlled by the national MEP, MEE, not any, being affected by the local government. They can have manipulate the monetary data at the local level, local station, not as a national one. National one, directly they have the online system to directly monitor the data, report to the central environment monitoring station. They have the online real-time data. It's so hard for them to change. So that's a very important indicator to measure the city, the air quality being improved or not. Water, similar, yeah.
Well,
With the mic. Just real quick, yeah.
I just want to echo what Nishing Hu,
Yeah.
Mr. Hu said about the central control. So when I was in Beijing, we asked to visit a monitoring station in Wuhan, and the Ministry of Environmental Protection at that time put somebody on an airplane with a key to go down and unlock the thing. So it isn't just, sort of that it sounds like they're, handling it nationally. But I mean, it really was, and that was very impressive to me that there's no local involvement in those stations whatsoever that I could see. Thank you.
Like they don't move it like outside the city. Just what used to happen. No access, yeah. Liu Shuang, you wanted to jump on your question?
yes, on the question of the evaluation of regional governments, as well as the gentleman's question on the interaction, I think, well, a quick answer is that they are evaluated both on the progress they have, the actions they have carried out, as well as the results. And for instance, the evaluation is sometimes not just on the government official, but on policy themselves. That means they will have to do a kind of ex post evaluation, not really the most comprehensive ones that we can think of, but at most of the ex post evaluation of public policies, they'll have to report on the progress and actions they put into place, as well as the results. So that will be one example of how they will be evaluated. And second point, I think on the interaction between the central and regional government, we have seen increasing self-motivated actions from the regional level. One example, I'm going back to the carbon trading, I'm sorry. But while we are working on carbon trading in Shenzhen municipal cities, we have seen actually the city itself and also the mayor we're talking to, they want to have more stringent carbon trading as a strong incentive to kick out those more polluting and carbon intensive industries. To them, the potential loss of GDP is not that comparable to the value of the land that the industry will clear up. And by having stronger environmental policies at those regions, they will be able to shift the economic structure. And for Shenzhen is one example, and many other carbon trading pilots along the east coast of China, where are much more developed than the other regions in China, do share the same motivations of having much stronger environmental policies in place.
But Liu Shuang, doesn't that? But that also isn't that leading also to pushing some of these dirty industries out west? Come on.
That was true, and I think that's why I was arguing that the environmental integrity of environmental policies should be ensured and maintained by the central government. And so that, well, for instance, for carbon trading, it's the allowances allocation methodology should be set by the central government and should treat the regions across China equally and to avoid potential carbon leakage. But I was referring to the incentives when there were no other regions doing the carbon trading back at time.
And did you, Charlie, there he had from MBR had the question about the cross-agency policies. Did that anything else to add to that, or about the NEA, right?
Nothing particularly promising, unfortunately. So the vision that colleagues articulated, before that was official this March, there was a version circulated as a rumors about having an even bigger Ministry of Environmental, Energy, and Climate and all the others. Things could potentially be different if that was the case. Unfortunately, I think the policymakers that we talk to and the practitioners who work on energy and climate/environmental communities are kind of segmented in a way. And I would say there's a invisible fair work between the policy setting on energy or the electricity power sector reform in China and environmental concerns. For instance, we've been, for carbon trading, for instance, to work, that we will need a different price regulation policy on electricity so that the incentives can be passed on to ultimate consumers. But the dialogue, it's supposed to happen between those who work on the power sector reform and the carbon market and other environmental policies. That was very challenging to facilitate those dialogues. And I think the demand side also, it's actually competing agenda between those two agencies, because to NEA, the National Energy Administration, the energy security is the priority of priority. Mm-hmm. And then when it comes to environmental issue, that can be deprioritized compared to their own agenda.
So there still could be some dueling dragons. Okay. Don't forget Judith's question about the question whether MEE can supervise operations, pollution, as industries go on that Belt and Road and build coal plants and whatnot. Is MEE, do they have a little office for that?
MEE actually definitely has an international department. They are directing the ASEAN Center, which is Shi Dan is not here, but his favorite word. Anyway, the ASEAN Center is taking the lead for the belt and road, green belt and road construction. Besides that, actually, MEE and the Shenzhen municipal government, the two co-establish a new center called a Belt and Green Belt and Road and Environment Technology Transfer Exchange Center.
Wait, say that one more time. You always have long titles. What is it called? So it's called Belt?
MEE, Shenzhen municipal government,
Mm-hmm.
called a Belt and Road and Environment Technology Exchange and Transfer Center.
What is that in Chinese?
生态环境部深圳市人民政府一带一路环境技术交流转移中心
We all got 交流, woo!
The reason I remember is so accurate because I'm working together with them, because we want to greening Belt and Road. So that's why.
Can you tell them to get a short and sexy acronym?
That's
That'd be
right.
good.
That's my advice. Put your initial name better, even easy to pronounce.
Green Belt.
Yeah. And back to the Judy's question about the Green Belt and Road. It is within MEE, they have the ASEAN Center dealing with the Green Belt and Road issue, and the Shenzhen Center also dealing with that one. And besides, in addition to MEE, actually, in the same period, during this spring's National People's Congress, China first time formally established China's foreign aid agency. They called China's International Development Cooperation Agency. This is the first time for China. Within the agency, environment is one of the key components.
So a new dragon.
And they are going to reorganize China's South-South cooperation funding, probably including the climate one, and others. They put them together under the same budget of the China's International Development Agency. So this is a new institutional arrangements.
So basically, people,
And,
you want gossip and what's going on, you talk to Hu Tao.
And
He knows
also
it all.
WWF, we actually working closely together with MEE. We normally 2 years based report, we measure the footprint or carbon footprint of China and the rest of the world. We normally during the CCSED annual meeting period, WWF, we release a report. Together, we're partners Chinese Academy of Sciences. We calculate, by the methodology to calculate the footprint to release during the CCSED annual meeting period. Yeah.
Liu Shuang?
Just to add upon Dr. Hu's comment, for MEE to directly supervise China's global footprint, I think we have seen increasing political willingness to greening China's Belt and Road Initiative. And actually, MEE jointly with 6 other ministries announced the guidelines on how to green China's Belt and Road Initiative later last year. And that's actually a cross-ministry commitment probably on a voluntary basis on how to supervise the global footprint. But there's always a but. We haven't seen real implementation measures on how exactly the MEE and other ministries are going to decrease the global footprint with China's investment and maybe Chinese companies engaged. And I want to make a distinction, and that's actually the feedback we keep hearing from the Chinese companies as well as the colleagues from many of the BRI countries along China's initiative, is that many of the collaboration formats of the Chinese companies on the local projects, it's EPC as engineer, procurement, and contract. So it's actually the local partner who are going to make decision, for instance, whether it will be a coal power generation or whether it will be a wind power generation. And for Chinese companies, it's actually quite somehow the case is they don't really have them. They don't really make decision on the nature and the technology of the project. They help with fulfilling the decision made on the ground level. So while we're talking to colleagues who work in those, for instance, in South Asia countries, we kind of agreeing on that local standards, both on the carbon and environmental standards, will have to be improved significantly for the Chinese companies to provide the technology according to the local needs somehow. And there's also a but here, I think, where there is an extra leverage point for the Chinese ministries, not just the Ministry of Environmental, not just the MEE, but while we have the statistics on how many of those projects are funded by Chinese banks, but here's the leverage point is if the financial regulatory agencies in China is willing to put some constraints on what kind of projects the Chinese banks, regardless of whether they are investing domestically or overseas, if they have to comply with environmental standards, then that can be an extra leverage point on top of what MEE is going to do.
That's great. Okay, just so I've been Alex Wong. Do you guys know Alex Wong? He used to be at NRDC. He did public participation and law stuff. He's in LA. He's watching on webinar. So I'll wave at him. He has a question. So you guys have, it's from Alex. So you've spoken about a wide range of measures aimed at improving efficiency. To what extent do the reforms that we've been talking about today address other values like efficiency, right? efficacy. Sorry, improving. I can't even remember. So we've talked about efficacy, and now he's wanted to talk about like efficiency in terms of cost benefit or environmental justice, under a ME. Do you think more is needed in these areas? That's one question. And you guys got to ponder that a moment. And actually, while you're thinking about that, Liu Shuang, I had a question about to go a little bit more in the ETS in terms of how, right now you said that the ETS is mainly focused on the power sector companies. And how
It will start from the power.
it'll start from power, but some companies have been, we talked over lunch how they've been balking at this, that they're not as open to, they're not receptive to this. Are they receptive to this regulation?
The power companies?
The power companies?
Well, most of them are responding very actively to the policies. The discussion.
Yeah, I'm talking about the lunch discussion, yeah.
Well, just to clarify that, it's been discussed that China's carbon emission will start from power sector, but will be further expanded to cover 7 other sectors. And that will actually take into half of China's carbon emission into the carbon trading system. And Jennifer's question on how companies are responding to those policies. And I think that's very much echoing today's theme on the governance. We have seen the increasing trend of how the companies are requiring the government to have more legitimate and sound legal basis on environmental policies. For instance, we've heard the story of, the carbon trading pilots in China, some of them are lacking a very strong and solid legal basis. For legal basis, we are referring to the legislation can be passed by either the local, provincial or municipal governments, or those who can pass by local People's Congress, that's the legislative body. And when some of the environmental policies are more in the format of policy documents or regulations instead of legislations, we've seen the stories of where companies will actually brought the case to court and asking and challenging the legal foundation of many environmental policies. So the implication from those cases is that the policymakers on both central and regional level, that actually require, even for legislative bodies, for instance, in China, that will be the National People's Congress, and it was the Legislative Affairs Office of State Council. They have a very long list of legislative items. Some of them, to me, are probably more important than environmental issues, for instance, on the social justice and education programs and the others. And so again, it's actually MEE and the other environmental related regulators. I hope there are not that many more left over. But then MEE will have to work with those legislative bodies to enhance the legal framework and foundation of many policies, either in place or that's upcoming ones. And they have to secure the support on the legislative, very competitive legislative agenda. And that's actually how they can respond to the increasing awareness of companies asking for the legal ground of environmental policies.
Okay, I'm going to rephrase the question. Do you think justice and cost efficiency are sufficiently addressed right now in the reforms? Think about it, and I'll collect 2 more questions here. Succinct questions. So one there.
Hi, I'm Daphne, and I work for Indufor, a forestry consulting firm. Curious a little bit to hear more about SFGA and if there are any changes in their responsibility there. Hu Tao, you mentioned, the national parks and reserves issue, but beyond that, are there any changes in environmental regulations switching from SFGA to MEE, or is it pretty much the same? Also, in terms of the incentives for sustainable forestry, will those still come from SFGA, or will those shift? And are offsets dead, especially for forestry and grasslands? Will the incentives come more from SFGA or MEE? Is there any kind of life for offset project development under the carbon trading, or is it just not going to be scalable at all?
Okay. Is there one short question? Jeremy, come on. Well, just ask it anyway, because you're You're my friend.
All right, Jeremy Schreifel's occasional China observer.
And often speaking up here, yes.
So a quick question about climate, not so quick question about climate governance. At the national level, or at the central level, as Hu Tao mentioned, everything's going to come under one agency with MEE. But yet it's still going to be two independent departments with independent responsibilities that can be, as you pointed out, Hu Tao, can be at conflict. And then between the central and local, at the provincial and local level, it's still largely climate's responsibility of the DRC, who aren't accountable to MEE, but at the same time, they don't have the same type of authorities that EPBs to go and do on-site inspections and hold some of the facilities accountable. So I'm wondering if you see these things as potential problems with the governance system, and if so, how the government might try to address them.
All right, we got 3 questions in 3 minutes. No, not quite. A little bit more than that. A few minutes more. So who wants to start?
Okay, but maybe I'll start weighing on the start with Jeremy's question quickly. So my impression is it's still unclear whether the local, provincial DRC will, the climate change function will be incorporated in provincial DEEs. But definitely the integrated environment enforcement force will be under MEE. So let's see how that part will coordinate with climate change related enforcement. And back to Alex's question. So I think besides this institutional change, there are other aspects changes are happening to take care of the environmental justice. For example, as Jennifer mentioned, that last December, in order to reach the 5-year air quality standard goal, a lot of extreme measures taken in northern China. Some rural areas were deprived their coal burning heating facilities, and but was not provided with natural gas or electricity instead.
But they met their target.
But it has a huge cost, and and many poor villagers were the people who were treated really hard. So I noted that in the state council's plan for the next 3 years on combating air pollution, which was issued on June the 27th, it's mentioned that it's the central government's funding will be expanded to more cities in North China for clean heating pilot programs. So they realize that without money they cannot really ensure the win-win situation for environment and and justice. And it's not a sustainable way to reach a particular regulatory goal at the cost of the people who are really need to be taken care of. And lastly, for Judy's question, one last question way in here. Yes, there are 6 interagency guidance on foreign investment by Chinese companies. But those are soft laws. There's a guidance. Largely it requires the companies follow the local laws and regulations. And but very interesting thing is that the Chinese Penal Code actually applies to Chinese persons, including entities and natural persons, for their conducts overseas. So, but environment crimes largely connect to the Chinese environmental law violations, which doesn't necessarily apply to overseas, but it may be a starting point for the further conversation. Yeah.
Some other answers here, yeah.
Should I see? Hey, hello, Alex Wang. How are you?
Hey, Alex. We're all waving at you.
Thank you for your question, Alex. And I think I was also involved in the institutional reform before when I was in the MEP. So one of the very important principles to design the reform, the new system, is efficiency, effectiveness, and efficacy. Those are definitely a criterion to design. And somehow it's not easy to immediately measure the new effectiveness, but easy to measure the cost, the staffing numbers. Normally, they really control the staff members, that's for sure. So that's a tradition, from the even Zhu Rongji's government. He's really want to control the staff numbers. And that's at the central government level. But the local governments is another story. But I don't have time to go to that far. And I think this also related to earlier Liu Shuang mentioned the local DRC only have a couple of staff. How can they manage the carbon market issue? Sven said it's very efficient, but it's joking. But what I found is the local governments, they always trying to find some solutions. Like they establish a non-profit corporate to manage that, authorize them. They ensure they do the right job, that their revenue could be get from the carbon exchange, but they're not allowed to make additional more money. Or somehow local governments like to have such a kind of new exchange offices to build up their green finance or financial center like Wuhan, Hubei province. They are so eager to have such a kind of center because they thought they are too far away from the Shanghai, from Shenzhen. They want to have a regional financial center. Even the government provides some subsidies to establish such a kind of centers. But still, the staff from the government is not enough. They authorize the corporate, to manage the issues. And let me quickly move to the SFA and SFGA issue. And so far I have not seen much changes, between the MEE and the SFGA. So I would say I mentioned that this is another dragon need to be reformed in the future. And the current carbon exchange emissions trading system, it seems such a offset is not being included in. Liu Shuang can tell you more probably, but I would say some very interesting phenomena is happening. If you go to Alibaba, to the website, to go to Taobao, Zhifubao, you see they call it ant forestry. People can voluntarily, have their forestry and in Alashan somewhere, to plant the real trees as their contribution to offset the carbon emissions. That's, I think, a very interesting story. And Tencent, Tencent company has a similar mechanism. More and more companies, especially young generations, I found that they really like such a kind of new games. On the Jeremy's question, I think you know better than me. You should answer the question. But in general, I think Chinese political system is very different with U.S. When the central government has reformed the system, the DRC system, the climate is being moved to the MEE, I would say the local governments, more or less, are going to follow the central. They also, not immediately, but in the coming maybe months or years, they're going to move the climate change division from the local, provincial DRC to local Department of Environment, DEE.
And maybe, and the ETS, because this was my thought, that the ETS has such high prominence that that's going to maybe kind of accelerate that, well, we got to do this. And so that, because I'm really seeing that the local reforms, they're going to take a while, and it's probably, I'm thinking as they go down on these 7 priorities that, okay, now we're going to try to figure it out for this priority. And I think that since air quality and climate are such big priorities that, I don't know, what do you think?
Have you finished your comment?
Yeah.
Well, we have the list of 7 campaigns, and climate change is not really on it. I have to point it out. And I think...
Another missing dragon. Yeah.
Well, it won't be missing dragon, but
missing policy.
Well,
it's pot of gold.
My observation is that even when Department of Climate Change was still with NDRC, I don't think we have the strongest foundation to prioritize climate change somehow in China when we have much more competing local pollution agendas, for instance, those on the list. I'm saying those are important. And if people are suffering a lot from the results of those pollutions, then it's reasonable to prioritize those local pollutions. I think even after Department of Climate Change has been moved to MEE, there is still a lot of capacity building and awareness raising that the Department of Climate Change will probably have to take lead within MEE so that the milestone on climate change actions in China will not be decreased because of the institutional reform. And that's certainly the case on the regional levels as well, as Jeremy's question was asking. And I also want to touch upon the cost and benefits analysis raised by Alec. Being an environmental economist, I'm certainly biased on that question. And I do think there is an essential role that cost and benefits analysis can play in the public policy making in China. And when we still had Professor Chen Jining, who was an environmental engineering policy professor in Tsinghua University as the previous minister of Ministry of Environmental Protection, he was personally very much motivated to see how the cost and benefits analysis can be integrated into the public policy making process in China. And I think it's not just the figure as a result of the cost and benefits analysis matters. It's that cost benefits analysis can provide us with the best available tool to provide a holistic view of the impacts and also the achievement from many environmental policies. For instance, there's been a huge discussion in China during the last winter when the supervision groups of MEE were sent out to all the regions in China. And there were the campaigns where companies and emitters were shut down. Only for a very short period. And that was actually at the cost of shutting down so many companies, and the GDP was not really promising during last winter. And if we can have a tool as a cost and benefits analysis, then we will be able to help MEE and to justify that to justify the balance out of environmental objectives and environmental economic impacts, and also to push MEE and the other regulators to take the other considerations as much as possible. And I think that can potentially prevent the policymakers to launch more short-term campaigns instead of having more sustainable policy tools in place.
Okay, great. So we're wrapping up here, folks. I mean, I love your enthusiasm here on a summer day. First applause, then I give you final announcement for these great speakers. And even before I had plans, and definitely with the showing today, the China Environment Forum is going to continue throughout the next year, I'm hoping every 2 months to have one meeting that we're going to focus heavily on these institutional reforms. I won't always use the dragon motif, okay, but it was good for today. But just so you know that we also had, there's 2 more meetings this month. We're going to do none in August because we're overdoing it this month. Next week, I'm one of the...
I'll be back.
She'll be back next week because she's still in town. I said, hey, while you're here. But the kind of this incubator that was created by Energy Foundation, the Innovative Green Development Program, who's a good friend of a lot of people here, she's coming to town, and she's going to talk about this new low-carbon index that they've made called Logic. And so we're going to have a couple other folks talking about, the title of the meeting is called Aiming Low. So looking at new tools to help cities in the US and China peak at carbon. All right, so that's next week, 19th. That one's going to be at noon. All right, you'll come out in the email. Right, look at the interns. Yeah, the interns like, yeah, it's coming out. Yeah, and then on the 26th, I mentioned earlier, we're going to have the Ma'ashan Rural Development Bank and some U.S., some DOE, and some other folks talking about green financing of energy efficiency. You don't want to miss it, right? New areas of learning. So again, we will be doing more on this this reforming stuff. And so thank you very much. And again, let's applaud these guys because they had good questions.